Welcome to Advanced Nuances, Patterns and POIs. I'm Magma, the creator of the Invisible Zone. I'm not sure how long the video is going to be by the time I'm done editing it, but I do know that you should probably watch it a few times before you even think about implementing any of these nuances into your trading. Let's kick it off with patterns. First, let's make some basic diagrams of the patterns that we know. We have our standard double valid pullback, we have our DNB, and we have the hump. I'm sure I've touched on these a little bit in the previous videos, but we're going to go over the context of where you want to see these, where it fits into the narrative, what it means when you're seeing these at certain POIs. This video right here is why I said in the last chapter that the half of you who take on the philosophy and the narrative and the spirit of the invisible zone are going to succeed twice as much as the half who do not. We are stretching beyond the technicalities and seeking to get in tune with the market. Let's pull these off to the side here and break them down one at a time. Here we have our standard double valid pullback. Price comes down and it puts in a low point here. We come up and put a high point in. We put in a low point and we close above the candle that caused the lowest point of this leg. And as you know, we take our entry when we get that confirmation with our stop manually below the higher of these two. But first and foremost, you have to know the context of where you're seeing the double valid pullback. Let's say that we've got a greed box here and we jab right down in the middle of it. We give a double valid pullback. And this is normal for us to see here. This is what we expect to see at this specific area. Additionally, if you're using a higher time frame low as a POI to take a trade from, you would expect to see this pattern specifically only if you do not touch the low. If you get a wick that jabs into this low, we are not looking for a standard double valid pullback anymore. I know your mind is probably going, well, what are we looking for? Just focus on one thing at a time. This is what we're looking for when we are touching the middle of the invisible zone or when we are not touching the low or on the flip side, the high. Now let's talk about DNB. The ideal setup for DNB occurs when we do get a bounce off of the invisible zone, and then after the bounce, we come and spike below the low that we based anchor A off of for the invisible zone that we got this bounce from. Pause that and rewatch that a couple times if you didn't get it the first time. Look at this right here. You can see how all of it comes together. We've got the hump. We've got a double valid pullback on the 1 minute in here. We jab below the anchor low. We've got DNB. We get a second pullback right here for the confirmation to continue with it. Everything you need as far as patterns go is right here, and all you have to do is practice it, add narrative, apply it. Let's finish up this diagram real quick. Price breaks the anchor low. It sets a low point and crosses above it right here. It sets a high. It sets a low point and it crosses and closes above that candle. Now, there's a couple things you might be wondering. First of all, how can we participate in this here if there's just one pullback? In the Invisible Zone Volume 1, I talk about that. I think I said that Nab had asked me a question about when you get one pullback here and then you, right after that, get one candle that comes down here and then you close above it. Can you take that? And I said, yes, you can. And it was my fault for leaving out the context because that's only inside of DNB can you take a fractal confirmation. Meaning you have a valid low established, you do not have a valid high established, but then you get another valid low established. As far as any of you know right now, outside of the group, we are simply just looking for a double valid pullback. You need a cross above the low, below a high, and above the low. And it goes in 1, 2, 3. And generally speaking, yes. But on DNB, if you have the risk tolerance or appetite for it, and internally here, price crosses above this low. It gives a fractal non-valid high, puts in a low point and crosses and closes above it, and all of the context and the narrative lines up that this is DNB, then sometimes I will take that. Here's the last piece of context that I love to see for the DNB. We bounce off of our greed box or our fear box on the flip side. Price comes down. Where you like to see it turn around is between the low down left that you're now anchoring to once you run this first anchor low and the low hanger. So in this instance, it would be this. Perhaps on the internal, you set a minor low right there and fail to take the high. So you're anchoring to the most recent. But even still, after running this internal, if we get a bounce here first, showing that we're respecting greed boxes, and we jab the anchored low, we would like to see the bounce come from the next invisible zone down. That gives me personally, like I said, enough enough confluence to take the second valid low, even if I haven't seen a valid high occur in between the valid lows yet. When we bounce off of this greed box and we jab this anchor low and touch an invisible zone right below it, when I see this bounce up here, what I'm trying to say is I don't want to see price get down here. I'm not looking for a standard double valid pullback anymore. If it looks like one is forming, it's probably going to crap out on me. In a DNB model, you don't want the second valid pullback to occur close to the first. You want it to occur above. Maybe you get a little fractal one right here and you continue. I see oftentimes without the context that I'm giving, people will see a pullback here and then price will start to come back down and it'll get about this low and give a little pullback here. And I'm not saying it never works, but this is not an A plus setup. It's not even in the A category. We're going to talk about mastery in the next video and the grading scale and all that. With this specific context here, which I promise happens a lot, you're looking for the second valid pullback to occur away from the first. By the way, guys, I'm not going to be going over the candlesticks. We're going to be focused on the patterns more. So if you are still someone who struggles with candlestick structure, that's fine. I made a video about it called The Fundamentals, Highs and Lows. If you've watched it once or twice and you still are struggling to not have it down by memory, if you want to join my Discord, you can come and ask me questions. I can review charts with you. The members in the group who are having success can review charts with you. I'm just saying that because I don't want to see a bunch of YouTube comments asking for me to make a video where I go over the candlestick structure of these diagrams. Go and figure that stuff out with the material I've already provided and then come back here and get this down. All right, let's discuss the hump now. Oftentimes we'll see the hump occur when price has a really lofty or ridiculous objective. For instance, let's say that price just dumped from way up here and we expect a recovery back into this area at some point. The hump will do two things for you here. One, it'll create an invisible zone with a greed box down below, because in the hump we have a failure low right here. It's a failure low because it fails to run the high that it came from. But in addition to that, it creates an invisible zone up here, giving price the gravitational force it needs to get up here. I always say to the group, when we see price just stop in the middle of nowhere and come down and come up, that price will make a decision at the end of the hump. And what I mean by the end of the hump is this leg right here. And now we have an invisible zone below to bounce off of, to come in, enter this invisible zone, potentially create the hump again to bounce off of the invisible zone that it created here, to come up and bounce off of the invisible zone here, and then finally to take it. And if price wants to come back in and we get a rapid recovery and a double valid pullback away from the first high, we have DNB right here. And all the way up, we've got the hump. They'll call it V-shaped recovery, M's and W's. That was also what I called it when I had very little understanding of what I was looking at. But now I see this is price generating structure. How often do we see we trail with our failure highs? Right here is not a failure high because it runs the low it came from, but right here is. So we can, again, if you've watched Invisible Zone 1 and 2, you know you're dragging from your original anchor, your successful high, to your failures. We've got failure 1, we bounce. We've got failure 2, we bounce. We run through, we come back in, we DNB, and we go oftentimes at least down to here. But look what happens if we run down there. We've now just blown through an invisible zone, a greed box. And now we're watching and saying, I wonder if we're going to run through this one. And if we do, that's when I say in the Invisible Zone Volume 2, zoom out, find on the higher time frame where price has a shot at stopping. In the meantime, you see this get run down to here like this, and you have an opportunity for a re-entry here, and you know that fear is winning because greed is losing. Once we form the hump, we've got a failure high here, and we've got a successful high here. We can look for a double valid pullback here and hold until we reach that higher time frame POI. We look for double valid pullbacks at invisible zones. We look for DNB when we run an anchor high and we turn right back around and set a lower high, and we look for these humps to generate our structure. Look at all the invisible zones that the hump generates for you. Look at everything that it tells you as these get run through. Even when we get to the bottom and it feels like we're recovering, we already know fear is winning the battle. Just because you're getting a retracement doesn't mean that fear is getting overcome. It just means that the market needed to create an invisible zone a fear box with the hump, and then it needed to get up to it, give you a double valid pullback, and finally go all the way through your range here. We prefer to get in up here and participate in the classic 100 points that my group is becoming widely known for, but we can always add here, or if we missed out, we can get in here. We can see that a invisible zone was generated, and we can even maybe scalp along up to there. We know that price must create the hump because it's the only way that price can generate invisible zones, and we believe in the invisible zone. I said in the first invisible zone video that I'll say it until I die, it's real. And if it is real, something must cause it to be there. The hump is what you will see all day long. And at the end of the hump, price makes a decision. At the end of the hump, price makes its decision. At the end of the hump, price makes its decision. Realistically, these highs came from this low. This low failed to run this, so the greed box gets respected. All right, let's move on to POIs. Lows, highs, and invisible zones. Let's start with higher time frame highs and lows. We're just going to use highs as an example, but this applies to lows as well. So I already talked about that when you get up close to it and we reject and we put in a higher low and then we fail to close above this, then we can expect to return here, and this is a double valid pullback. It's also a hump that generates an invisible zone here, which could potentially then give us the energy we need to cross up out of here. Now, when we are approaching a high and we stop here, we set a higher low here, we come up and close above this, and our next low closure occurs above this high, that is when we believe that we're continuing in this direction. Now, we don't just have to rely on this pattern here, because 9 times out of 10, you're going to have an internal fear box here that's getting disrespected. This is here to try to send price down, and we just blow through it, right? We get a bounce off of the greed box with a double valid pullback that also generates the hump. We have an invisible zone that stretches from the successful high to the failure high that was created during this double valid pullback. We run up to the top of it and we're bullying this fear box. So what do we know right now? We're respecting the greed box, we're bullying the fear box. When we break this, if we want shorts, we need to see D and B. So the next low after this that we need to see after the break of the high is down here, away from price, and we can see us go through the range. But that's not what happens here. What happens here is we come out and we set another higher low above this high. And that's how our pattern aligns with our narrative of the invisible zone. Greed is winning, fear is losing, the pattern gives confirmation, and we can continue with it. Now, what's the opposite scenario? We come up, maybe we spike with some wicks, we get up in here, we come back into the range, we go a little bit out, and then we set a lower high right here, and we fail. This is D and B. Sometimes it can be hard to recognize on the high side. I know that some people in my mentorship will invert their charts to be able to look at it in another way. But this is a totally different story at this high, right? Here's what's going to happen before you get up to this high. You're going to give some respect to this fear box. If we don't show respect to this fear box, we're expecting to see a higher low occur here and then continue. When we do give it respect and we jab out and in and out and in, we start to realize exactly what we're looking for. And a lot of times you'll have another invisible zone that you're going to bounce off of to initiate the DNB pattern. Those are the things we see happen at highs and lows. Or your internal highs or lows just get absolutely run through. Your invisible zones are getting run through. There's no confirmation for an entry, so you're not worried about losing, but you need to zoom out and figure out where is price going, right? We need to hop over to the 12 or the 144, take a step back and figure out our narrative again. Invisible zones. Let's talk real quick about trailing invisible zones, because this is a question I get a lot in the group. The hump gives us invisible zone 1 and we bounce, and then we get another hump here, and then we come up in between and we bounce. And what is happening here this whole time? We've got the same anchor from the very get-go. We anchor from our successful high to our failure, and then as we break this high, we move to our next failure. And you can see this is a failure. This high is a failure high because it failed to send price to take the low that it came from. And we drag it out here, and then we bounce. And maybe we get a double valid pullback that occurs below the high, and we go and run through this and head to a higher time frame invisible zone greed box. Or we run this anchor high and we look on whether we're going to get the continuation or D and B. In this scenario specifically, with all the respect we're giving these fear boxes, I would imagine you've got another fear box right here. We could come back down, we could set a lower high, and we could take that to the bottom of the range. Or we can set this higher low here and continue through. So that's how to trail your invisible zone. You need to be moving it. It's not just a one-time thing. It moves. You've got your invisible zone, bounces off of there, you move it to there, you move it to there. It shrinks. It always shrinks. Now, there are some instances where people will get confused because they see something like this, and the rules state that you should anchor from the successful high to the failure high. Right? We come up and we don't get all the way to this invisible zone here, and then we come down, we do a dance, and somewhere in here we have a failure high. And the rules also state that after you drag out from the first failure, you should then drag to the most recent failure for your second anchor. And so people will be looking right there. Comes up and runs through it, gives a double valid pullback and goes to this zone. And it moves down and it goes. Maybe D and B's here or whatever, but nonetheless, they're missing out on this entire short because they wanted the invisible zone to be right here and they think, oh, it's getting run through, but it's not. This is called the low hanger or the high hanger. I haven't come up with a word for on this side. So the high hanger, I know that sounds stupid, but low hanger, high hanger, you have to be able to zoom out and use the higher time frame to develop that context and see that it's not exactly black and white. You're not always going to just drag from here to here and then from here to the next one. There are advanced nuances in this. You have to get repetition in. And real quick, I've been given the guys, one of the mentorship students came to me and said, Magma, level with me. If I want to master this, what do I have to do? And when I replied to them, they literally sent a laughing emoji back. They thought I was kidding. And I was not kidding at all. I sent them a song, and I'll link the song in the description. And I told them to go to the 12-minute, speed it all the way up, and press play and watch it while you listen to some music and become immersed when you see the hump and then you see the invisible zone it creates get run, and then we retrace and then we run way higher. And then on the flip side, you see this invisible zone get run and we slightly retrace and then we dump. And then you see this hump generate an invisible zone here that gets run through, and then we run 600 points, 700 points, 800 points. And you see price bounce off of this invisible zone, and then you drag it down and it bounces off the next one, and then it goes. You see price come and break the anchor, and then D and B. You start to see how this here is a hump and how price makes a decision right here with the patterns I just taught you to go higher. If you're watching this advanced nuance video, then you really want to dive deep into this, and you need to take that seriously and familiarize yourself with price. You need to get intimate with NQ, buddy up with it, best friends, blood brothers, soulmates, spouse, whatever you want to call it. You need to know it as well as you know yourself if you want to succeed. And after I had that conversation, I realized how ridiculous that notion is to people of just watching price play out like that and listening to some music and just learning, downloading the information into your brain, the patterns into your brain, the way price moves into your brain. After I realized how ridiculous of an idea that was to one student, I went and I told all of them. That was just yesterday and today that I've been getting on to them about doing this. And half of them will listen to me and half of them won't. And I already know who the half who will are and who the half who will not are. And I know the limit of the success that the ones who will not do it will have. And maybe them hearing me say this, they know who they are. They know that I know who they are. If you realize I'm talking about you, you don't need to come and message me and say, hey, Magma, I know you were talking about me. I'm sorry, I'm going to get FX replay. Just do it. Just do it and start sending me screenshots in the backtesting channel. That's all I want. All right, let's talk about fractality. So I have two uses for this word here. For one of them, let's imagine that this is your 12-minute and you've got all this and you've got this big structure here. You've got a successful high here and then you've got a failure high here. And internally on the 1 minute, you start to get small failure highs. Can you cross-reference between time frames? Yes. This doesn't just have to be a 12-minute high to a 12-minute high. It can be a 12-minute high to a 1-minute high for your internal. And this is great because the internal model can tell you what's going to happen externally. If we just shoot through this with violence, we come up here and we set this higher low, we can expect maybe even to shoot through the 12-minute with violence. Or also, if you're looking on the 144 chart and you see a big high, a big low, a big failure high, and then you come down here and you're trying to make a decision on the 144, but you don't have an established low yet or an established high here yet, all you've got to do is look on your 12-minute and drag from your 144 to your 12. That'll do the trick. By the way, that's only in special cases when you have to do that. For instance, right here, I have a failure high. Why is it a failure? Because it failed to run the low that it came from. But then right here, I have a successful high. People will ask me, which one am I anchoring to? This top one up here or the successful one? You just answer the question yourself. You can identify the successful one, right? For greater accuracy, you may zoom in and grab whichever is responsible there, but you need to make sure you're keeping perspective and zooming out. And that's why utilizing the fractality of this is so valuable, because it's hard to stay both zoomed in and zoomed out at the same time. And then finally, narrative. You're going to get the narrative from the invisible zone more than anywhere else. Price will bend over backwards. It'll throw itself on the ground. It'll throw pebbles at your window. Price will kick and scream and fight to first create the invisible zone and then to make it to the invisible zone. We're going to talk about why in philosophy, but for now, understand that the narrative is always looking for where price is trying to create an invisible zone. The hump will indicate to you where it's trying to create an invisible zone. When all else fails, all of the probability-based strategies don't seem to line up, you had triple confluence with a different set of concepts and you got run through, come back to this. All that price promised that it would do is generate the invisible zone and make its way there one way or another. That is it. That is narrative. That is the point of the hump of the invisible zone. If you have specific questions about this or you want to get practice with me, come join the mentorship. I'll put the link down in the description. That's the Discord link. Once you join the Discord, you'll be navigated to where you can decide to go premium. You won't be able to chat or see anything besides people's P&Ls and testimonials when you join as a free member. But if you do decide to join the mentorship by becoming premium, you'll get access to live streams every day. I personally trade in front of the students every day. You can ask as many questions as you want. You can send charts for me to look at. We also do live backtesting sessions in the evenings where we go over these advanced nuances. I wasn't able to fit everything into this video. I promise I'm not just saying this to try to bait you into getting premium. There's always going to be something that I leave out. There's so much stuff that these guys get every day in this group. Stuff that I'm probably just forgetting to talk about right now. I've tried my best. I've gone and looked back at the list of everything I was supposed to discuss on this video. Anyways, I'll let you get up on out of here. See you in the next video. Mastery the grading scale.